Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Kelsey Evans, she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Archives and Special Collections at the GLBT Historical Society. I'm also currently serving as co-interim executive director. So we're going to get tonight's event started. I'm going to open with some introductory remarks, and then we'll get into the program, which is Into the Vault, a virtual behind-the-scenes tour of the archives. So I want to start by acknowledging that the GLBT Historical Society is based on Ohlone tribal land, and we honor the contemporary and ancestral lives of America's indigenous peoples as we meet tonight. This event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel and on our website. If you're watching live, we'll make time for questions at the end, so you can post those to the chat. We're also going to share a lot of links today during the talk, and we will send a follow-up email to attendees with a list of those links after the event. Finally, I want to thank all of our members and donors who help make our work possible. If you're not already a card-carrying member of the GLBT Historical Society, I invite you to consider joining today. Members get a variety of perks, including free admission to the museum and programs, and the opportunity to adopt an archival collection, 20% discount on merchandise, and invitations to member-only events. And you can learn more about how to become a member and other ways to support the Society by visiting glbthistory.org. All right, so I'm going to add my other speakers here, and we'll get going. So I'm one of the speakers tonight, along with my colleagues, Isaac Feldman, he, him pronouns. Isaac is our reference archivist, and Megan Needles, they, them, she, her pronouns, and Megan is our project archivist. Later in the talk, you'll hear a bit from a member of our archives working group, which is a volunteer advisory group, but we'll introduce him more when we get there. So in today's talk, we'll discuss how archival staff preserve and share LGBTQ historical material. We'll walk you through the sort of life cycle of an archival collection, starting with the donation process and accessioning, and then moving into preservation and description. And then we're going to wrap things up with digitization. Along the way, you'll get a peek into the vault, and we'll share some of our favorite pieces and collections. At the end of the talk, we'll introduce a new workshop program that we're launching this year through the Archives Working Group that provides free archival skills training to the public. So if you're inspired by the talk and by learning about archival work, or you have a project that you've been looking to develop a specific archival skill for, this workshop program will hopefully provide some helpful options for you. All right. So to get started, I wanted to give kind of a quick intro to the Society in case folks aren't too familiar with us. We are an independent nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1985, and our mission is to collect, preserve, and share the history of LGBTQ people and culture with a special focus on Northern California. We have two sites, a museum in the Castro and the Archives and Reading Room in the Mid-Market District of San Francisco, sort of near the Tenderloin. We also have a lot of online offerings, including digital archival collections and digital exhibitions. As the archive staff, my team and I here today, we are primarily responsible for continuing to develop and grow the permanent archival collection, preserving and caring for historical material, and making that material available to the public, both on-site in our reading room and remotely via the web. In the archives, we house over 1,000 individual archival collections that occupy more than 4,000 linear feet of storage. And on the screen, you're seeing a look into our vault. Those boxes in particular house our periodicals. Material in the archives includes personal papers, organizational records, audiovisual recordings and photographs, periodicals, like I said, like newsletters, works of art and artifacts, and various textiles. So we have a lot of different kinds of material. As a queer archive, we think pretty broadly about what constitutes archival material. So sometimes the communities, activities, and lives that we're trying to document don't always leave a lot of paper-based records, but they may leave t-shirts and drag and pins and leather vests. So we try to incorporate into our archival practices this diversity of material and history making. And on the screen, you're seeing just a small sampling of the items showcasing this diversity. And this sort of brings us into the first moment in a collection's life with us, which is the donation and accessioning process and deciding what is included in the archives. So I'm going to talk about this process because it's a large part of my job as the director of archives. So I spend a lot of time working with potential donors and talking with folks about their material. I also do a lot of work with my staff and the community to strategically plan our collecting initiatives to help expand our holdings and ensure that we're representing in the archives the LGBTQ community and the diversity within it. So most archives have something called a collecting scope. This is often formalized in a collection development policy. Our policy is public and online if you want to read it in its entirety. But in a nutshell, collecting scopes define what a repository collects and why. So our scope, for instance, is focused on LGBTQ historical material with a focus on Northern California. Often archives may define special areas of interest as well. So we're particularly interested in material that documents communities currently underrepresented in many archival repositories, including LGBTQ BIPOC communities, transgender people, lesbians, and people with disabilities. Collecting scopes can also define what archives don't collect. So for instance, we for the most part don't collect books. We direct book donations to SFPL or other local libraries who are better suited to care for and make available book material. So donations come in from folks reaching out to us, and sometimes from us contacting organizations or individuals directly. And we are so lucky, and it's really gratifying to have a community that's really invested in documenting the queer past. We receive an average between 25 and 50 unsolicited donation inquiries a month. So it definitely keeps us busy reviewing material. To walk through this donation process, I'll use sort of a hypothetical case example. We'll think about a community member who has reached out to me wanting to donate their personal collection of papers and other historical material. I'd start by gathering information about what kinds of material they have, what major topics, time periods, people, etc., are represented in the material. And then I'd talk with them about our collecting scope and whether the collection could be a good fit for our archives. This is usually a conversation that includes discussions about any privacy concerns, goals and expectations for us as an archive and for the donor for their material. And we discuss if the donor is really ready to transfer the ownership of the collection to us and make it available for research. Often collections coming to us are very personal to the donor. So we want to take time to really talk about readiness and acknowledge the kind of emotional labor that goes into preparing a donation. Sometimes estate donation or organizational record donations can take years, and sometimes they can just take a conversation or two. So what's really important in the process is that the donor has trust in the organization and that they really understand what it means to donate to the permanent collection. I should note, if we aren't a good fit for someone's material, I do my best to provide resources for other repositories that might be a good fit. So folks can continue talking with other archives about a potential home for their material. On our end, once we've decided that the collection's content is a good fit and the donor is ready to donate, we want to make sure that the provenance of the collection is clear. So this means the documentation of who collected or created the material originally, and the record of when it came into the archives and who was involved with that process, etc. We also want to make sure that there's documentation of the rights transfer, including ownership and copyright specifications. All of this is really important for an archive to have so that we can preserve and make the material available to researchers long term. So we aren't just thinking about the next few years, we're thinking about 50 years from now, 100 years from now. We want future archivists and researchers to have a clear understanding of the sort of who, what, when of the collection. And a big piece of this documentation is the deed of gift. This is a form that all donors complete that outlines the terms and conditions of the donation. and it helps the archive keep track of who donated what and when. It's really crucial for an archive to maintain this kind of documentation because it helps us manage the material, be transparent with researchers about where the material is coming from, and it helps prevent any confusion down the road around questions of authenticity and ownership. So once we finalize the deed of gift and the collection has been physically donated to the archive, we formally accession it. This means we create a collection file to preserve the deed of gift and the other provenance records, and we give the collection a title and a unique collection number. So this is sort of like a book has its title and an ISBN. These identifiers help distinguish the collection. You'll see the name and number repeated on all the boxes for that collection and in the catalog record. They're essentially the way that we keep track of a collection and delineate in the archives what material belongs to what collection. It's also important for citations. So on screen, you're looking at this lovely photo of disco star Sylvester, which is a photo by Robert Pruzan from the Pruzan collection, number 1999 or 1998-36. And so if you're thinking back to this picture of the vault again and the thousands of feet of boxes, and you've wondered how we keep track of everything, this is a really important part of how we do it. So some final thoughts on this topic, and you can imagine singer Beverly Shaw pictured here at the legendary lesbian club Mona's 440, sort of singing us out. I think some of the biggest takeaways to consider about managing donations and building an archive, especially if there's anyone joining us tonight that is thinking about starting their own community archive or just building your own collection, you really want to record and have documentation as best you can about where the material is coming from, when it was acquired, and who is involved in the collecting. We're going to get into how we preserve and describe the historical content of a collection next. So what most researchers are sort of most excited about and want to come to the archives for. But this initial phase where you develop a clear collecting scope, you set up consistent processes for donations and documenting provenance, and you establish this sort of meta-level collection management system. This is all really important for building an archive with an eye toward being able to preserve and share the material long-term. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I will say if you're thinking about donating your collection and you want to learn even more about this topic, Isaac and I did a talk a while back called Leaving a Legacy, Archival Estate Planning. It's free and online through our website, and the link is also here on the slide. So you can check that out if you're interested. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Isaac to talk a little bit more about processing and describing collections and getting them available to researchers.
Hi, everybody. I am back. And yeah, I am just going to have a little bit of a chat with you about processing. And then I will turn it over to myself from the past to show you a little bit of a video tour of the vault. Because, as an archivist, I think that my vault is the most interesting place in the world. So it's going to be fun to share with you later. So archival processing, which is basically the process by which we organize and catalog the materials that we've acquired. It looks a little bit different for every collection. There's a different right way to do it for every single collection. And, that can be in some ways overwhelming because it means you have to make a lot of choices. But it also means that there are a lot of right ways to do it. And that's one of the things about working with archives that I find really fulfilling. It's the fact that, no matter what you do, the end result is that the material will be more available to the public. People will be able to learn from it. It's going to stay alive. It's going to just sort of stay in human hands where it belongs. So processing begins with usually the same set of steps. First, you survey the collection. This is the fun part because archivists, our curse is that we don't get to look at our things very often. We spend a lot of time showing our things to people, bringing out a box for a researcher. But we don't get to go through the stuff. It just sits there tantalizing us. So during this survey phase, that's when we really get to do that. We get to learn and know the collection. And the more that we do this, the more time that we spend seeing what's there, what kinds of materials, what kinds of information, what kinds of privacy issues it might have, the more we do that, the better the processing job is going to be. So we really get to spend that sort of time and get emotionally invested in it as well. We also check for mold and damage during this time, because the two most important things about processing, number one is, of course, to make it more accessible to the public in various ways. And number two is to make sure that it's not getting destroyed any faster than it would usually get destroyed by time. Materials destroy themselves all the time. Newsprint is full of acid, for example, and it damages not only itself, but everything around it in the box. Sometimes an item will be moldy, especially if it has been kept in a basement or another damp space. And mold can be really catastrophic. It can get out and infect other parts of the archive. We're always looking to see, do we need to remediate any problems with this before we put it in the vault to sort of become part of the quote unquote community, I might almost say, of materials in the archives. After that, we try to figure out, what order does this belong in? Should it be in chronological order? Should it be, in alphabetical order by subject? What's going to be the way that people will find it most useful? We ask ourselves at this point, too, how much work does it really need to get that legibility that people need? The way that I would define enough legibility for an archival collection, will a researcher working from the catalog be able to find what box they're looking for? That's really it. And if there's a collection that has one box, they'll know right away. So maybe that collection needs a little bit less organizing before it's doing what it needs to do. Conversely, if a collection comes in that has 100 boxes, you might need to do quite a lot of work to make it possible for the person to use it in their research. Other things we think about, some collections arrive in an original order that the original person, the creator of the collection, put it in. Some of them are completely chaotic. Some of them we just want, because it's our organizational priorities, to give more help to than others because they belong to marginalized people or groups. And we feel that there is an urgency to getting these stories told. Not that there isn't an urgency to telling all archival stories, but there are some that I like to see put towards the front of the line because archives have historically put them towards the back. Some collections are just big. Like I was saying, they're hard to navigate as is. Some of them are small and simple. As you can see, a couple of collections that I've just included photos of here on the slide. This is just, a box of cassette tapes that's already about as organized as it's going to be. You might or might not make a list of them, but that's about all that it needs. Over here at the lower right, you've got boxes of notebooks. I wouldn't know what to do with this if I opened it for the first time. So I am going to be doing a lot more with that. So some things that might happen during the processing process. Refoldering and rearranging of materials, like I said, sometimes the folders are disintegrating that were originally used. They're old, they're acidic. We want to redo them so that the folders won't damage the stuff inside. A lot of the time we refolder also just to make things tidier and to make the collection something that you can sort of parse from just looking at the top of the box. We'll put things in acid-free containers. Again, we are just, like, archivists think about acidity so much. I'm not even kidding. And because it's one of the things besides heat and besides dryness and besides light that will really mess up a collection before its time. For the same reason, preservation, we'll put photos into plastic sleeves or paper sleeves just to keep fingers off of them. Most people assume that we wear gloves, but we really don't. Most materials, you don't need to worry about your hands damaging them, but that's not true of photos. Your hands actually are not great for those at all. We might arrange materials into series and sub-series. The series Isaac Feldman's Jobs and the sub-series GLBT Historical Society, again, just for ease of use. We do this for preservation, I can speak, and for clarity. Again, we are just here to ensure that you know what to find when you open a box and to ensure that the stuff is still in the box in decent condition when you open it. The last thing that we do in processing is we create a finding aid, and that is a catalog entry. Unlike a library catalog entry, it has essay style notes. So in addition to saying how big it is and who donated it, which are just statistics and facts, we will also write a couple of notes saying, here's why we think this is interesting. Here's who this person was or who this organization was. Here is sort of what you can expect to learn and what you can't expect to learn. All of these things, they've got their own fussy little names and stuff. They've got sort of their own ways of being laid out. But the important thing is that the finding aid tells you what it is, what's in it, some reasons why it's interesting. We acknowledge that we can never understand all of the many reasons why someone might find something interesting. There are so many ways of looking at any individual object, even in the world, and so many different kinds of value that it has and information that it carries. But we'll pick some of the ones that are most obvious. And now, like I said, I'm going to play a video of me showing you around the vault. I will see you in 9 minutes. Here we go.
Hello. This is Isaac speaking from a few days ago. I am going to give you a little bit of a tour of our vault. The first thing that you see as you step into this space is that it is all about controlled chaos. This stuff is in an order. It's just not as apparent as the order that things are in a library. In a library, stuff might be kept in alphabetical order or in Dewey Decimal order, something that's conducive to people coming in and browsing who are members of the general public and are going to serve themselves. In an archives, the archivist is the one who finds things for you. So it doesn't necessarily need to be arranged in a way that you can just come in and intuitively see. As long as something is on the shelf and it is reflected in the catalog as being on that shelf, you know, XYZ collection is on shelf A2 or what have you, that's really enough. So you're going to find things next to each other that like have nothing thematically in common. But you will also tend to see types of things stored together just because that's the best way often to store them. You know, if they're all shaped the same, they will make a tidier stack. So that's what you see as you walk in here. Our larger artifacts and some posters are kept up here. Other posters and larger photos are kept in cabinets. Costumes are kept in giant costume boxes. I just pulled out this random, it just looks like a chunk of glittery fabric, but it is a costume from the Queen of Disco, Sylvester. So it's kind of like a treasure chest. You know, you open up something very plain, and inside you find something very glittery and very queer. So I'm going to continue to walk backwards, cautiously and carefully through the archives, showing you some of the interesting stuff that we've got. You know, there is everything here, some decor from old drag clubs. This is from Finocchio's, which was founded in the 30s. We've got some art. The one with the pink stripe across it there is by Gilbert Baker, who was one of the designers of the rainbow flag. Here's Daddy Allen and Belts, a tribute to an important member of San Francisco's leather community. So as you can see, it's material that's on all kinds of scales. It is not just about documents and photographs, although we have tons and tons of those more traditional archival things as well. The history of queerness is also the history of embodiment. It's the history of community and of people's everyday experience. That is not all stuff that we write down. Sometimes we immortalize it instead in photography, in art, and in a variety of other media, some of which I will show you in a second, continuing to walk backwards very carefully. As you can see, this is very much a working space. It is a room where things happen and where a lot of work takes place. And we wouldn't have it any other way. I think that a pristine archives would be one that was finished, and the goal of an archives is actually never to be finished. It's to continue to chronicle the community that it serves as that community changes and grows. So I was talking about lived, embodied, everyday experience. Examples of some stuff that we have. This is our board game collection, or actually just a small part of our board game collection. We've got Homonopolis, whose tagline is the most chaotic game. Gay Strip Down, which is self-explanatory. One of my very favorites, DYKE, Do You Know Enough? Do You Know Enough is a fiendishly difficult game. Who wrote Mother of Us All in 1946, a play about Susan B. Anthony? What's the only animal known to live in colonies ruled by a queen? Where and when did Olga Korbut first compete in an Olympic gymnastic event? The thing that fascinates me about this incredibly difficult lesbian trivia game is that it also demonstrates that queer community historically is all about passwords and shibboleths. It's all about, knowing enough, and demonstrating that you are deeply committed to the community and that you sort of know all the codes by which queer people might communicate with each other and indicate that they share a set of personal and political interests. I don't tend to think of our archives as being about trivia, in the sense that I think of our archives as very important. But it is true that game is kind of emblematic of some of the things that queer people do tend to write down, i.e. the web of references that connects them. So, moving down here a little bit further, walking forwards, much less challenging. This is sort of the part of the archives where we have more manuscripts, more works on paper, a little bit less art. This is some stuff that I have just pulled that I thought was interesting from the Pat Bond papers. Now, Pat was a lesbian actress who did a series of one-woman shows that were based on just various moments in lesbian history. This one is about Lorena Hickok and Eleanor Roosevelt, who some historians think were romantic partners as well as best friends. It's a thing about working in a queer archives that is quite unique, that you see in our archives evidence of people doing queer history. So within this collection about Pat, the actress, is Pat's collection about Eleanor and Lorena, the people whose lives she chose to imagine in her work. The interest in telling our story, because a lot of the time it will not be told by other people, is very consistent throughout the vault here. I also pulled out, we have very extensive ephemera collections, so collections of things that were meant to be thrown away. But obviously, in this case, we're not. These things were... So this is from Frameline, the queer film festival that's still running to this day. We've got some of the first things here, first ephemera from Frameline back when it was called the San Francisco Gay Video Festival. So this is from, 77, early days. All of these events and things, it's very important to have collections of ephemera because they show you what honestly, what ephemeral things people occupied themselves with. You can see how they spent their time, how they celebrated themselves and each other. While I've actually been on that note, I have just taken you over to one of my favorite new acquisitions. This is the Denise Diane papers, and this is, I will show you. This is a photo album of Denise's friends from the late 60s, many of whom were trans women like her. It is a remarkable chronicle of just a community of women who were coming out and transitioning at just, not the first, but by far not the most recent. This was still a situation where people were, they were doing a lot of pioneering community organizing and learning to understand what resources they had to transition in ways that, in a lot of ways, were just not available to them even 10, 20 years before. So, these moments of queer joy that are also very political moments because they show people banding together and forming a community. I am almost done showing you around the vault. My last thing that I was going to talk about is our collection of periodicals. We are very rich in periodicals here, and I'm very happy that that's the case. I've just pulled out one to show you. This is Onyx, the Black Lesbian newsletter. It is just a collection that is clearly put together by a small local community of lesbians. It's a labor of love. It's got articles, it's got stories, it's got personal ads. you know, it shows that often the scale of these periodicals was not huge. It was something that it was larger than a circle of friends, but smaller than a national organization. And you can see how before, you know, long before we had social media and like our little group of mutuals on Twitter, queer people were getting together and unifying and finding each other and falling in love through all kinds of means of communication. So that's the Vault. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thank you, me from the past. think I am going to be handing you over now to my colleague Megan, who is going to talk about digitizing. Yeah, I'm adding you. I'm going away.
Digitization. Thanks, Isaac. Let me just add our slide. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Needles, and I'll be talking about digitization, which is something I do regularly as part of my job as the project archivist at the Society. Digitization is the conversion of an analog medium, such as paper, photographs, film, or video, into a digital format. Today, I'll cover reasons why digitization is useful to archivists, how we select items for digitization, technical considerations we have when digitizing items, basic measures for preserving digital files after digitization, and digitizing audiovisual materials. Digitization plays an important role in the preservation of cultural heritage materials, and there are a number of reasons why archives digitize their collections. One major reason is that digitization facilitates broader access to archival records. Digital surrogates of materials can be shared online, removing the barrier for researchers needing to visit the physical archives. This also means that because researchers can access the digital surrogate of an item, any potential risk that may arise from handling the physical original item is mitigated. Another reason why archivists digitize materials is because it can be a really useful preservation measure that ensures the longevity of our cultural heritage. All materials contain what is known as inherent vice, which Isaac kind of touched on earlier, which means the tendency of materials to deteriorate due to the essential instability of the components of which they are made. So for example, many kinds of paper have acid in them that makes them chemically unstable. And over time, the acid will eat away the text on the page and cause paper to turn yellow and become brittle. So digitization allows archivists to make a one-to-one copy of an item in an effort to ensure that it will be accessible to researchers for many years to come, even if the physical original deteriorates beyond use. The benefits of digitization are appealing, and it's common for people to assume that archivists would opt to digitize everything in their collections, but this isn't the case. When we digitize materials, we are in essence increasing our preservation responsibilities because the digital files that are created through this process need to be preserved as well. Additionally, it can be time-consuming and costly to digitize, and the storage of digital files costs money as well. This makes it important for archivists to be thoughtful about which materials they choose to digitize. When prioritizing items for digitization, it is important to consider several things. One is the copyright of the item. If you do not hold the copyright or are not in contact with the copyright holder, there are limitations to the types of access you can provide, which might mean that you refrain from digitizing that item. Another thing to consider are preservation concerns, both of physical materials as well as digital files. If there's a physical item that is at high risk of deterioration and holds significant value, it might be a good candidate for digitization. But on the other hand, if the kind of material you want to digitize will leave you with a digital file format that requires special software or hardware to be accessed or that is expensive to store, you might hold off on digitizing. A third thing to consider are privacy and access restrictions. Some materials contain personally identifiable information, such as social security numbers or medical information, that would not be appropriate to make widely accessible to the public without redactions. And materials could also contain culturally sensitive content that could also restrict access. And a final thing to consider is just the uniqueness and rarity of items. Historically significant items that are unique and that are not being preserved elsewhere tend to be high priority items for digitization because they might be the only copy left in existence. When digitizing materials, there are certain technical decisions that need to be made regarding the type of file format you will digitize your items to, the resolution of the scan, the color and bit depth, and compression. Generating a high-quality file is important when creating digital surrogates of physical items because it ensures that the most amount of information and detail will be present and therefore will serve as a satisfactory reference for researchers and other users. However, typically, the more information and detail in a scan equates to larger files, which require more digital storage. So when approaching digitization, archivists aim to follow best practices, which vary depending on the kind of material being digitized, while weighing the storage capacity of their digital repository. As mentioned earlier, preservation does not end with digitization. Once an item is digitized, archivists become responsible for the preservation of the digital files created as part of the digitization process. There are many aspects of digital preservation, but some basic ideas include creating and storing metadata about the digital files. It's important to record administrative, descriptive, and technical metadata about files to ensure that they will be discoverable and their significance will be known in the future. It's also important to develop a standard for the naming of files. This also aids in discoverability, arrangement, and capturing the significance of each file. And finally, storage practices are a key component of digital preservation. There are many things to consider when it comes to digital storage practices, but a simple, easy to remember rule to follow is the 3-2-1 rule, which states that you should have 3 copies of a file, 1 primary copy and 2 backup files on 2 different types of storage, such as in the cloud, on a local hard drive, or on LTO tape, and to make sure that at least 1 copy is stored offsite in case of fire or some other type of disaster. Audiovisual materials and archives such as videotape, audio tape, celluloid film, and grooved media are often prime contenders for digitization. This is due to several reasons, one being that the inherent vice of many audiovisual materials such as magnetic tapes and acetate film are causing these materials to deteriorate rapidly over time. Magnetic media such as half-inch videotape and pneumatic tapes are at particular risk due to a kind of deterioration called sticky shed syndrome. We're currently in what is being called a magnetic media crisis as this media becomes unplayable more every day. So for example, many of us have VHS or maybe mini DV tapes at home sitting in our closets. And if you've tried to play those tapes in a deck recently, you might have noticed distortion with the image or sound. And that's usually a consequence of the breakdown of that magnetic media and why it's so important to get those materials digitized. Another reason is that the playback equipment needed to view legacy audiovisual materials such as VCR decks, reel-to-reel decks, phonographs, and film projectors are becoming obsolete and unavailable. Without this equipment, researchers and archivists alike are unable to view those items. So for these reasons, archivists are racing against the clock to digitize audiovisual materials. The digitization of audiovisual materials often requires specialized and hard-to-find equipment, and there are added technical considerations required when working with these materials, which means that many archives outsource this digitization work to vendors, though DIY workflows are possible if outsourcing is too expensive. And the last thing I'll mention about the digitization of audiovisual materials is that these files can be really, really big. Because a tape or a film in some cases contains hours of content, the resulting digital file can sometimes be pretty massive. This means that archives must budget for additional storage space to preserve these files. And now we'll be going back into the vault to see a quick demo of how we digitize items using our Bookeye Scanner. Hey everyone, welcome back into the vault. I'm going to be doing a quick digitization demo to show you how I digitize some items here at the Society. So over here we have our Bookeye Scanner, and this might look a little different than maybe a flatbed scanner or something similar that you might have at home. And there's a couple differences, but the big difference here is that the Bookeye Scanner has this movable bed and cradle. So these pieces can go into a V formation where you can cradle a book and digitize books that way, which is really handy. So you'll see these a lot in libraries. They're also really useful for digitizing large format things like posters, for example, and newspapers. So yeah, and I use this pretty regularly. I can also digitize smaller items like photographs and documents as well using this. So come over here and I'll show you this item that I've selected for digitization. This is from the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus records. And there's a couple of reasons why I chose this item for digitization. One, the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus collection, the rights have been transferred to the Society. It's also, you know, a pretty, this is dated from 1981, and it's very likely like one of the last few copies of this item in existence, so it's unique and rare, and I don't think it's being preserved elsewhere. And perhaps most importantly, this item is at risk of deterioration, and we see it beginning in a couple of areas. There's like a yellowing of the paper here, which could very much well be due to like an acid that it's being exposed to. It's mounted on foam, which could be causing some of that deterioration. There's also, you know, some issues here with the corners and edges, and you know, we have this tape repair here. So it's on its way kind of to being too fragile for us to have researchers handle. So for those reasons, this is like a good contender for digitization. So first step here is I'll just bring the item over here and place it on the bed. And one of the handy things about this scanner is that it will automatically crop and de-skew, so I don't have to be too kind of worried about placing it in an exact way. And now, in order to kind of do the capture settings and configurations, we'll come over here to the computer. And first thing that we'll do is name the object, and this will be the name of the file that will be generated in this process. At the GLBT Historical Society, our file naming convention includes our repository name, which is shortened here to GLBTHS. We then have the collection number here. We have the box and folder numbers, and then a brief description of what the item is. And so, as you can see, there's a lot of really useful metadata that's embedded right into the file name. So I'll hit OK. And then the next thing that I want to do is set the capture settings. And we have a number of presets for all, you know, different materials we might be working with, since, you know, your capture settings will differ depending on what the material is. Since this is a poster, I will select that preset and open it up. And these settings are setting things like the resolution, the color, and the bit depth. And it's also determining what file format the file will output to, which is TIFF in this case. So now I'll hit OK. And now we're all ready to initiate the scan. So I'll stand up again here. I'll lower this plate, which is here primarily to help with glare. So I'll lower that, and then down here there's a pedal. And initiate the scan. And so after this completes, we'll need to be concerned with the preservation of the digital file. And so what will eventually happen is the file will go into our digital asset management system, which is a software that allows us to store metadata and kind of organize and keep track of our digital files. And it also makes sure that the integrity of the files lasts over time. So now if we go over here, we have our completed scan, and now I'll export it and ingest it into the dams. And that's all. Okay. So next I will hand things back to Kelsey so that we can share some of our favorite items in the archive.
Thank you. All right, so we've gone through a lot of the major work and responsibilities of archivists, and we've gotten a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look with Isaac and Megan, but we just wanted to take a little bit more time to showcase a couple of other items that we typically pull during our tours as well. So Megan and I are going to share some of our favorite collections and pieces. So this first one, I wanted to start with highlighting the papers of Elsa Gidlow. She is recognized as writing the first book of openly lesbian poetry published in North America, called On a Gray Thread, published in 1923. She was also the founder of the Druid Heights Artist Colony in Marin County, and she's just this really great example of somebody who was out and proud in the 1920s and throughout her life. She was very much an original. And we usually pull her collection for tours because it's pretty extensive and it includes really amazing correspondence and writings and photographs and other material. But one thing we always like to pull out is the edition of On a Gray Thread that we have in the collection. This volume is a rare book, made even rarer by the fact that it includes handwritten notations by Gidlow and some edits to the poems. So as I know I said earlier that we don't really collect books. This is an exception in part because it really documents her process and thinking about her work even after its publication. On a Gray Thread is now in the public domain. So we've digitized an edition and it's online in our digital collections. And if you want to read the whole thing, it makes an excellent book club selection, I will say from experience. And the link is there, but it's also searchable on our digital collections page. The whole Gidlow digital collection also includes photos of Gidlow throughout her life and her friends, some audio recordings and other writings. I also want to highlight Jose Saria's collection. Saria was an opera singing drag star and political pioneer. He ran as an openly gay candidate for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1961. He's also remembered as the founder of the Imperial Court System, which started as this kind of campy drag gay social club, but it's grown into a network of nonprofit charitable organizations throughout the world. We usually pull out Saria's collection on tours because he's such an important figure, but also because his collection is really, really rich. It includes amazing photos of mid-century drag culture, records related to his political activism, and really extensive documentation of imperial court activities throughout California, including in more rural areas where documentation of LGBTQ life is often less available, though the communities were definitely there and thriving. And if you want to see more about Saria, we've put together a primary source set that highlights related items from our digital collections. The link's there on the slide. We are also selected through the State Library's program, California Revealed, to digitize large portions of Saria's collection, including lots of that Imperial Court material. And that digital collection should be live in 2023. So with that, I'll pass it to Megan to tell a little bit more about some collections.
Thanks, Kelsey. Let's see, next slide. So one of my favorite collections in the archives is the Daniel A. Smith and Queer Blue Light videotape collection. Queer Blue Light was a guerrilla television group in the 1970s, and guerrilla television was a movement of video makers, primarily in the 70s, who sought to subvert the top-down distribution of information in broadcast media and instead build a democratized television where activists and artists and otherwise ordinary people could produce media by and for the people. This movement was made possible in part due to federal programs that made newly invented portable videotape cameras available to communities across the country at no or very little cost. So Queer Blue Light made videos reporting on queer issues that weren't being properly covered by mainstream media, such as the death of Harvey Milk, the Briggs Initiative, and queer issues in the Central Valley. And they also featured queer artists on their public access television show. Another cool thing about this collection is that it contains a number of amateur home videos depicting queer life in the 70s. And this collection was digitized and is available on the Internet Archive if you'd like to see more. The link is included here, and I think it will be shared after our presentation. And since these tapes have been digitized, I'm happy we can share a clip with you today. The footage that we're about to share is of the Queer Blue Light hitting the streets in the Castro very shortly after the assassination of Harvey Milk and George Moscone, and interviewing people about their feelings and impressions of what had just happened. You'll notice some moments when the sound drops out and where the image is distorted, and that's an example of some of the consequences of the degradation of magnetic tape that I spoke about earlier. So I will begin that now.
When did you first hear about the assassination of Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk?
I heard it on the radio about 11:20 maybe.
Where were you, at home?
Yeah, I was at home. I was real shocked. I was just blown away that, well, I've never really liked Dan White, but it really blew me away that people have to go to such great lengths to get, you know, what they want. I guess that's what he wanted, was to kill Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk. I think it's like a great tragedy, because Milk was, I think, a true leader in the gay community. He was ambitious, but he was a man of judgment, and he didn't represent one group of people. He represented all the people in this district and all the people in this city. And as a gay man, I think it's real important that in this city that we have representation. And now, looking around, I don't know who's going to take his place, you know? I wish that Sally Gerhardt lived in this district so that she would be a candidate for that, you know. And it's tragic, because I certainly don't want Stokes to be my representative, and looking around, I don't see any other clear leader, you know. Certainly not the Pride Foundation, and you know, I don't really support any of the small sects. I think that the strength of Harvey was that he represented everybody, you know.
He was a unifying factor.
He was a real unifying factor. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Do you feel that the murder of Harvey Milk had to do with him being a gay man?
Well, I can't help think anything else, you know, because I don't know where I heard that Dan White was anti-gay, but I know that
he was the only member of the council that voted against extending human rights.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that, you know, and I heard that he was anti-gay, and I knew he was real conservative, but I think I just can't believe it. I mean, I'm real upset about it, you know.
Yeah, so Queer Blue Light, and like I said, if you want to watch the rest of that clip or any other the tapes in that collection, they are many of them are on the Internet Archive. So now I will bring Kelsey back on so that she can talk about the Archives Working Group.
Thanks, Megan. So yeah, we're going to wrap up tonight's talk with a quick introduction to the Archives Working Group. and the new workshop series that we've started to provide free archival skills training to the public. We wanted to end with this tonight, as we know there are so many folks out there who are interested in archives, perhaps building your own collection or working with your community to gather historical material. But you may not have formal training, or you may have specific questions about a project. So we're hopeful that these workshops can leverage our skills as professional archivists to provide a service to the public and to folks who we know are embedded in communities and are so central to preserving those histories. So with that, I want to introduce our Archives Working Group Chair, Al Bursch, and Isaac's gonna join as well to talk a little bit more. So Al, I will bring you on. Hi, Al and Isaac.
Hi. Thanks, Kelsey. And thanks, Megan and Isaac, too. My name's Al Bursch. I'm a member of the Archives Working Group, and our group is made up of volunteers and staff members, and our role is to be an advisory group to the archive staff and staff in general at the GLBT Historical Society. So what that means is we might help advise or provide our thoughts on archival policies like accessioning policies or collection policies. And we also volunteer, especially before the pandemic. We spent some time in the archive coming in to help process collections or just sort of help out whenever archive staff need some extra hands. And during the pandemic, some of that just turned digital. So it's really fun. And we're always looking for new people to get involved. It's kind of part of how this community archive continues to serve the community and have community involvement. Most of us are archivists or historians or kind of have some experience making decisions about policy and also some of the sort of processing projects and things like that. Yeah, so we wanted to introduce the group and put it out there and make you all aware that we're here, and we're planning a new event series that Isaac is going to talk about to sort of, hopefully get more people involved in community archiving.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I would just like to briefly introduce our new workshop series that we are doing. We know that a lot of people in the community are interested in archiving on, any level, from organizing their own materials at home to starting up a community archives of their own. And, we are a 30-year-old organization. That is not the newest organization, but it's well within, human memory. There are people who remember when we were in someone's living room. And we really want to help other archives get off the ground and, go into and then beyond their own living room periods. So we would like to start offering workshops, and their themes are going to be driven by the interests and the needs of people who are interested in them, because, we don't want to just do a series of lectures that might be completely beside the point of what people are excited about learning about archives or the things that they are curious about or anxious about. There's an interest form. I realized that this link being in my my slide here is largely meaningless, but after the event, we are going to distribute links to all of the stuff that we have been talking about. And we just have a Google form. Let us know who you are, what you want to work with, what you want to hear about. All of the things that we have been talking about, selecting materials, processing materials, digitizing materials. People with expertise are available to help you out with them. Archives have a very strong community culture of just service. We really value the chance to help other archives grow and to help other archivists grow as well. So I would really encourage you, even if you're thinking, whatever my project is, it's too small, it's too weird. I don't even have a living room yet. It's still in my closet. It's still in my mind. I encourage you to please let us help you, and just approach us, fill out our form. We will see what we can do to just help you take it to the place where you need to take it. I think that is all that I have. And yeah, Kelsey will come back. I'll do questions.
Thanks, Isaac. I'll also note that we'll have the glbthistory.org website will be updated with information about the Archives Working Group workshop series as well. So yeah, so that's our presentation for tonight. We want to again thank you all for joining us. We're going to open it up for questions. So you can start asking those in the chat now. Isaac and Megan will start giving those a read. While those are coming in, I'll say again, if you want to support our work, I encourage you to become a member of the GLBT Historical Society. You can also sign up for the Society's email newsletter, which is where we share info about our work monthly. And you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. A reminder that we'll be sending out all the links that we talked about today in an email to attendees after the talk today. And our emails are there on the screen as well. So anybody have any questions?
You know, as my 5th grade teacher would say, if there aren't questions, it means we explained everything perfectly. So, you know, I will take that as a compliment, but I do want to hear from you too. Ooh. This is a deep cut. I think this is a Megan question.
Okay. I guess I'd be curious to know if you mean motion picture 35 millimeter negative strips or like still photographs. But if it's still photographs, I have to admit I haven't done a ton of that kind of digitization work myself, but I do believe that there are types of like kind of, I don't know what you would call that, but there's like hardware that you can use with your scanner where you can like slide the 35 millimeter strip into, and then I believe you can just use like a normal kind of flatbed scanner to do that. I think with negatives, you do want to have like higher resolution. So there's some additional kind of technical considerations at play there. And then with motion picture, 35 millimeter negative, it's yeah, a whole other another process entirely. So yeah, still photos. So yeah, I hope that partly answers your question. I don't know if Isaac or Kelsey have anything to add there.
Oh, yeah, Bill follows up saying that they're stills. Yeah, I'm sorry. I handed this one over to Megan because I assumed that it was a moving film question. But yeah, I digitize film on the machine next to me all the time. It is like a mid-range Epson scanner, and the like really there's just like a little plastic frame that you can put in it that you can buy. And then it's just a matter of using, like, again, the generic Epson scan software. It is shockingly easy to digitize still photo negatives. And if you have them and you want to know more, well, we've got a workshop series for you. This is exactly what I was talking about. So
yeah,
oh,
I'd also say those are always depending on your budget constraints and what you're looking at doing. Those questions can be raised with vendors as well. You can get estimates from vendors if you don't have the capacity or the want to do it yourself.
Yeah.
There are specialized vendors that exist as well. And like I said, you can always ask for estimates to get a sense of what those costs would be before you sort of jump into a project with them. I'm going to show this question. If we have audio cassette tapes, should we get them digitized before approaching the GLBT Historical Society? No, is the short answer. If you have magnetic media and it's audio tapes or VHSs or anything like that, really reach out to us first, and we can talk about, like I said at the top, the sort of collecting scope, what the material is, And then we can talk with you about the digitization plan for that material. We don't expect collections to come in ready to be served to researchers. That's our job. We don't expect collections to have been digitized fully before they come into us. That's work that we will do. We're a nonprofit independent organization, so any financial support people can provide to help with digitization costs, that kind of thing, we always love. It's definitely not required. It's something that our operating budget helps support. So yeah, the long answer to that is to contact us first. We can talk about the magnetic media, but we don't expect you to have done all that work as the donor ahead of time. Something we'll talk about. Isaac or Megan, any other thoughts on that? No. Any questions? I'll say we do, sort of pre-pandemic, we used to host in-person tours, and it's still one of the perks of a certain level of membership, our on-site tours, but we also tried to host sort of annual public tours. The space is really limited when we're able to do those, even again before the pandemic, just given how small the vault spaces are. But we're hoping as the pandemic evolves that we'll be able to offer in-person tours again of the vault. But the reading room is always open to folks. And there's a really nice window that shows into the vault in the reading room. So you always get a peek into the vault when you come to the reading room to do research.
Well, seems like quiet times. Oh, yes, I have a Waverly, I'm going to pretend that this question doesn't actually come from my partner. A total stranger asks, what's the most satisfying part of working in or with an archive? It's showing people, for me, things that they didn't know existed and didn't imagine could have survived. Especially ephemera, when somebody is looking for something, especially something that's reminiscent of a moment of nightlife or party life that they experienced 30 years ago. And we don't think that any memory of a party is going to exist in the public record, but sometimes they do. That's an example of a thing that's come up for me for whatever reason fairly often recently, people looking for remains of nightlife past. And getting to hand them, a matchbook or a flyer or something and saying, look, this really happened. You're not the only person who remembers this moment in time that you thought was lost. It's the ephemerality of queer history and sometimes the unexpected survival of ephemera are both really, really powerful things to think about.
Yeah, I'll say my background, I have an educational background in both sort of archives and public history work, and then also doing my own historical research and work. And I found that the work that I love the most, when Isaac talks about that sort of service aspect of archival work, that really appeals to me. And I really love facilitating people's research. So I love being the person that's making sure all of these resources are preserved so that work can be done, so that people can do artistic work with historical material and new historical work with material. I love being that facilitator as much as I love doing the research myself. And I think that service aspect is what drives so many archivists who stay in the field for a really long time, is because we really do love being that connector person and helping people find those resources so that they can do all this amazing creative work.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, I think it's really, really rewarding work, since a lot of aspects of queer history have kind of been marginalized in more mainstream archives and just in the historical record. And so it's an incredibly rewarding work to be doing, to be helping to preserve it. But also what's very satisfying, I think, about this work is I feel like a lot of archivists like to arrange and organize things, and it's super satisfying for me to like write all the folders and number them and, you know, put everything in its spot and organize all the files. It's very satisfying. So yeah, just throw that in there. Looks like we have a question from Chris, who asks, how do you come up with topics and decide on exhibits to mount at the museum?
Sure. So I'm gonna give a sort of tentative answer in that we are not the curatorial staff of the museum, so I will defer to their expertise a bit. But typically there's strategic planning that goes into it, so wanting to make sure that we're sharing a diversity of stories, representing the material in the archives and those new stories that are coming in when we do collection development, but also sort of responding to what the community is interested in and trying to make shows that are of interest. We also have a community curators program, which I think is really, really cool. I love this program. I think it's such an important aspect of a community archive, a community historical society, which is what we are. And that community curator program allows folks to propose their own exhibits at the museum in sort of coordination with the GLBT Historical Society curators. And that work there's a whole section on the website sort of about it, but it's paid work. Like I said, it's collaborative with our museum staff, and it allows folks to sometimes share sort of personally loaned material, so the material that's not even in the archives but comes from folks. Also using material from the archives. So a lot of the temporary shows you see are sort of in connection with this community curators. But yeah, we should do a whole program that the curatorial side of staff and the museum side of staff can really get into that deeper than we can, just because that's more on their side.
Oh, just one more. Well, there may be others, but a quick one. Any affiliation with Lambda Archives in San Diego? No. Queer archives talk to each other a fair amount, although I always wish that we talked to each other a little bit more. We certainly refer people to each other all the time if we feel that they have material that, for whatever reason, because our focus is local or anything else, it might be more suitable for a different archive. But no, us, Lambda One, the Leather Archives, very, very much separate folks with, separate histories.
Mm-hmm. We do sometimes have collaborative grant projects and things like that. We finished up an NEH grant a couple years ago at this point with UCSF Archives and SFPL's Hormel Center and ourselves working on an AIDS history project, digitizing our records that are sort of shared between these institutions. I shouldn't say shared, they're records of organizations that have been split between these three organizations over time and collecting. So we do often sort of try to work collaboratively when there's an opportunity to do so with other queer archives. And we have a listing on our, if you're sort of like, I don't know the landscape of LGBTQ archives in the United States, we've put together a list on our website of other LGBTQ archives in the United States. The Society of American Archivists also has a really good, really complete listing of lots of repositories that have some sort of queer material, whether they're community archives like us, focused on LGBTQ material, or just a smaller collecting sort of initiatives within larger institutions. But if you're a researcher out there looking for queer material, those lists, kind of knowing the landscape of archival repositories, can be really helpful. Give it like 1 more minute. Be brave if you have a question. Looks like it's kind of quiet, which is fine. I'll say that if you have questions that come up or you didn't get a chance to ask them tonight, please feel free to reach out to us. We're all here and able to answer questions. Isaac is our reference archivist, so it is his whole job to deal with reference questions and answer research questions and help people find what they need in the reading room and online. So Isaac in particular is a really great person to reach out to with research questions. I would encourage you to follow up with him. And then if you have a larger project in mind, something that you want skills training with, this Archives Working Group workshop series would be a really great resource. All right, so I think we'll wrap up. Thank you all for attending. Like I said, we really appreciate you taking some time this evening with us. Thank you, Isaac, Megan, and Al for presenting with us tonight. I'm going to share a final slide that will be we'll show a link to our survey about the program. So we really appreciate feedback that you can give as we create these programs. So I'll flash that at the end. But otherwise, I will wrap up and thank you all again for joining us. Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Mm-hmm.